Welcome to Adventures of the Awakening Heart, where we explore the heart in all its forms, physical, energetic, and spiritual. Today, we're not going to be talking about the heart directly, although we may touch on it at various points. Instead, we're going to look at information that will help us understand the heart, as well as the body in general, more deeply, particularly in relation to the physical and energetic heart. So today we're going to be exploring the world of quantum biology and how that relates to the workings of the body and of the mind. Our wonderful guest discussing these issues with us is Patricia Worby, who is an educator with a special interest in quantum biology and metaphysics, but she's also a therapist and specializes in trauma therapy, using various techniques to help her support the release of trapped emotional energy in her clients. Patricia has written a number of excellent books. I've got a couple of them here. And if you enjoy what we talk about today, I highly recommend you get a hold of at least one of these, because as you're going to discover, Patricia has a brilliantly clear way of explaining some very complex topics, which is why she's such an excellent teacher. And if watching and listening is more your thing rather than reading, then she also has a YouTube channel, and I will put the details of that below. So I'm also excited to tell you that Patricia is going to be a live guest for our Audience With series on the 10th of April, 2025. So that's in just a few weeks' time. So if you can join us then, that will be wonderful. And we will be going into more depth on the quantum biology in that event. And you'll have a chance to ask her any questions that you would like to. But for now, let's say hello, Patricia.
Hello.
Welcome.
Hello, Liz.
Lovely to see you. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. Yeah.
Good,
Yeah,
good.
excited actually.
Yeah, and we're excited to have you.
Mm.
So there's so much that we could talk about, and it's wonderful that we've got two opportunities. We've got today and then we've got the live event, because there is so much. I wanted to begin, because we are going to go into your work as a trauma therapist a bit later, but I wanted to begin with the quantum biology. And this seems to be an area that's becoming more widely recognized. It is a discipline all of its own, and scientists are more interested, but I'm seeing books appearing on shelves for the layperson now talking about these issues. So it's a growing area of interest. But for those who don't know what quantum biology is, I wondered if you could just begin by telling us, how is quantum biology different from regular biology?
Well, in order to answer that question, first of all, I think I have to explain what I mean by quantum.
Yes.
Okay, so quantum is describing the smallest possible units, and it's of matter generally and energy, which are interchangeable. And we've always believed that quantum science, as it were, quantum mechanics, didn't operate in living bodies. It only operated in the kind of material world that we witness outside of our bodies.
Mm.
And so these energetic interactions that we observe in tiny particles in, say, the Hadron Collider, were very theoretical. They in fact they're sort of very reductionist as well. So they're looking at the tiniest parts of matter, even below the subatomic particles, down to what's called a Planck unit, which is the smallest thing that we know of in our universe. And this has taken up a lot of funding and energy of scientists, but they're very, very separate from the world that we inhabit as human beings in our living world. And the two have not interacted. So until very recently, I'd say till about 2012, that seemed to be the crucial moment where the term quantum biology, the two words, actually this study of the very smallest particles and their interactions, and biology itself became put together as a concept, that there was actually quantum interactions going on, energetic interactions at this subatomic level in the human body, which is a phenomenal thing to understand, because it means that we are not just material selves, we are not just these physical tissue organ systems, we are energetic in nature, and everything interacts with everything else. That's what the quantum mechanical view shows you, is that everything's entangled, right? That's the term for everything connects to everything else. And therefore the nature of existence is not purely material. It's not just physical, it's energetic. And that opens up a huge option for healing, of course. It certainly, with my head, you know, I'm thinking, aha, that can do something very different from just putting in new molecules into the human system via supplements or you know, food, or maybe changing your exercise routine or whatever, so that you're getting more oxygen or whatever. But we can actually influence it in a new way. And for me, that's the power of quantum biology, which I can go into more detail if you'd like me to. But we're looking at something as not merely material, not merely reductionist parts, but as wholes that vibrate and resonate with energy and information. And if we can intervene at that level, results are much, much quicker than just purely changing the material substance of the body.
Why do you think that, because quantum physics is now over a century old, it was discovered end of the 19th century, around then, beginning of the 20th. And why do you think it was that was only seen to be relevant in sort of matter and material, and it's taken this long for scientists to appreciate? Because it seems a bit obvious, doesn't it? We're made of the same sorts of molecules that all matter is made of. So it seems a bit obvious that there's going to be quantum effects, you know, in us, because, you know, we're made of the same things. But it seemed to take a long time. Was there some sort of resistance to it, or why do you think it's taken that time for scientists to start to recognize that this is a phenomenon?
I think there's several things at work here. The first is that science is siloed. All right, as a former scientist myself, I was a biochemist. I never learned biophysics because that's a different discipline.
Yes.
If you're looking at quantum mechanics, quantum physics from the early 20th century, this is working on the whole physical nature of the universe, but it's not looking at us as part of the universe, because it's a very left brain, reductionist, analytical framework for looking at the world. And so it hasn't really considered how that interaction happens in the human body. It's largely due to the fact that physicists only talk to physicists. As a former university researcher myself, I worked in a multidisciplinary unit. Well, that was innovative. Okay? I was in multidisciplinary research. In other words, different disciplines communicating and informing each other, presenting new and radical ideas. We're talking probably late 90s, early 2000s. But prior to that, university research, which is where most innovation happens, was in these narrow disciplines that don't talk to each other, that don't read the same journals, that don't even have the same terms for similar things. And we'll come on to what an example of that is the way water exists in the body, right? Which has about 10 different terms, depending on whether you come from quantum physics, quantum biology, neurology, you know, all the different disciplines have a different term for the same thing. All right. And so you don't have the same language to react and understand things. And I guess so that's been a hindrance until about, as I say, 2012 seemed to be a crucial moment where there was a book published it was actually a UK London, I think he was at UCL, don't quote me, Jim Alfredi anyway, wrote a book called Quantum Biology with a colleague of his from a completely different discipline. And he was a biologist and the other guy was a quantum physicist, and they found, I guess, over discussions maybe in the university canteen or something, I don't know, but they had similar understandings, but they had this different language that they needed to meld and communicate. And there was something about that book, because I had an interest in biology all my life and the nature of human functioning, that threw me, you know, quantum biology, how could that be? And then I read the book and it was like, oh my God, smell is quantum, and taste. And there's now evidence that sight and possibly also geolocation, you know, we know birds use quantum processes in migration, for instance. These are quantum processes, and this is only the beginning, you know. We harvest light apparently as well. We thought only plants did that, and we ate plants. Indirectly, sometimes we eat the animals that ate the plants, but it now turns out our human systems are able to harvest light as well. So it's really, it was considered, I think, that it was too warm and too wet. I don't know why that would be the assumption, but that was the general belief, that the human body was too warm and too wet to be able to take quantum processes, which had only ever been studied in closed systems in isolation. The Hadron Collider is a really good example. And you know, experimentally, it's very hard to investigate as well. Very hard. Because when we look at human bodies, we tend to look at static representations of parts of human bodies. We look at DNA, we look at a frozen moment in time of the DNA structure. You know, X-ray crystallography was the first way that DNA was ever studied, and that's how we discovered the double helix. But we're looking at a static structure because of the way we're measuring it. If we now look at maybe the newer techniques of fMRI, or vibrational techniques, we can see that the human body is in resonance, it's in movement, it's constantly moving. DNA is a good example. It vibrates, it's an antenna. And energy moves up and down through the center of the DNA molecule. So I think it's a combination of factors why it hasn't really impinged until now, but thank goodness we now are able to view these processes in real time. And that gives us a much greater insight as to what is actually happening in the human body and how it integrates these quantum processes to facilitate life.
And it seems to be, and I'm sure you're going to talk a bit about this, that understanding biology on a quantum level is helping to explain many of the things that were unexplainable before. And an example that really hits home for me is if you think about the body and all the billions of reactions that are occurring in each of our billions of cells every second. And in the old model, because I studied biochemistry like you, we were taught that these reactions occurred because molecules would travel to one another and then they would bind, and then that would allow reactions to occur. So you actually had physical movement of molecules allowing these the binding and these reactions to occur. But the speed, and obviously that can happen very, very fast, but when you consider how many reactions are occurring in the body, as I say, billions and billions every second, that movement was still way too slow to account for all those reactions taking place. And it seemed that that was a bit of a puzzle that no one could really explain, you know, back when I was at university. Whereas now, if the body is communicating, it still communicates with molecules moving and binding, but it seems that it's also a lot about energetic communication. And when energy moves through the body, it can happen, if it's on a quantum level, beyond the speed of light even, can't it?
Correct.
It's almost instantaneous. So
Yes.
that helps to explain something that for so long we didn't understand.
Yeah, yeah, we had the billiard ball
Yes.
understanding of molecules, didn't we? And we drew
Yeah.
them, we draw them as billiard balls with
Yes.
sticks. And you know, a familiar understanding of how something docks onto a cell membrane with a receptor is that it has to sort of land, and the configuration of the protein has to match that of the receptor. It's like a lock and key,
Yes.
which is a lovely metaphor.
Yes.
But it's only a metaphor. Okay, it actually, the way this seems to work now, we understand, is that the resonance of the molecule and the resonance of the receptor match. They become in sync in some way. They have some fractal configuration of each other, which sets up a resonance which allows the process. And now that's very, very much quicker than this sort of, you know, docking. And yes, undoubtedly that does occur, but it's how the protein fits, how it recognizes the correct receptors. We've got a large number of receptors for different molecules, is a resonance effect. And that is in its very nature a quantum experience. So yeah, so it helps us explain that.
Yes.
It helps explain perhaps a little bit more about neurological processes as well. You know, how do we play the piano? When you look at a really excellent pianist, and their fingers are moving so fast over the keys, and yes, practice makes perfect, but it's far too fast, even for neurological signals to be traveling. In the current model, the physical model of you know, synapses releasing neurotransmitters and so on and so forth, that there is this other way that the body uses that makes the communication so much faster. And light actually plays a big part in that, which I'll be talking more about when I do the presentation.
Yeah, we'll get on to light in a minute as well. But you know, as we start to understand this, it becomes clear that the body is communicating through energy. And, you know, from the quantum physics perspective, matter is energy when you get down to the very basics anyway. Do you think that that idea, because we can't get away from it when we start to consider quantum biology, that we're working, our body is functioning through energy, do you think there's a bit of resistance around that? Because once we understand that, it's going to revolutionize everything, you know, medicine, our whole understanding of how our body works, isn't it?
Yeah, there is a huge resistance. The biomedical model is predicated on chemistry.
Yes.
And intervening at a chemical level. So pharmaceutical medicine uses interventions with specific molecules that interact in certain pathways in the body and change the functioning. Vaccines do the same. If we say that actually energetic medicine is faster, more efficient, it can be self-administered to some degree, rather than relying on experts to do it for you, with all the side effects that can have. But the vested interests, let's say, are going to fight this hugely, because it's their profit margin.
Yes, exactly.
And so, you know, I think energetic medicine is also subject to a lot of discrediting online, in publication. You know, there's been a huge war on homeopathy ever since the 1930s, because it doesn't use physical chemistry, because by the time you dilute the material, there's no actual molecules of the original substance in the water. It uses the energetic imprint of the molecule within the water structure, which is bioelectric, and which stores memory. Water stores memory. Who knew? I never learned that. So so the war against this, which I call it a war deliberately, because I think it will be a huge struggle to bring in energetic medicine. But what's happening is it's actually coming in under the radar at the moment.
Yes. Yes.
And certainly what I do, I can talk about that later, but I think is working on an energetic level rather than on a physical level. And I know when I talk about it that people with very left brain kind of awareness, left hemisphere kind of reductionist scientific people, like I was,
yes,
find very, very challenging, and they call it woo-woo or anti-scientific or pseudoscience. But actually the research on this is present. It's just not talked about, and it's just not known in medical science because it doesn't fit the model, and anything that doesn't fit the model is going to be excluded from the model.
Absolutely. So you've touched on some of these things. Let's go into a bit more depth now about, I don't know if you want to start with light or water, but can you tell us a bit more about how both light and water are working with the body and how the body uses those things on a quantum level?
Sure. Yeah, so light at the fundamental quantum level is made up of photons. And these are the smallest unit, if you like. And I can't even call them a particle because they're not a particle as such. They're vibratory probabilities. But we absorb light through our skin, even through the top of our head. It gets absorbed into our brain, but primarily through the eyes. This is the biggest way. And this isn't just about vision. This is about light as information, which it turns out photons are transmitted through the nature of the body system, which is largely composed of water, which is liquid crystalline. And so photons can actually enter our cells very easily, and they become like a nutrient for the body, actually. Think now of light as a nutrient, speeding up enzymatically certain reactions that are very essential to life, like our energy production, for instance. They organize growth, development. Photons are actually involved in all of these things. We've long wondered how it is that a tissue knows how to develop itself. How does a liver cell know it's a liver cell and not a retina cell, and so it seems that light as information is what is dictating these processes. But because some of the light is not visible to us, in particular, we have a very narrow band of vision for the human eye. The electromagnetic spectrum is huge, and we have a tiny sliver that we can actually perceive. But outside of that is a huge range of electromagnetic frequencies that our body has adapted to in evolution, and actually responds to. We're not aware of it. So I think light is an organizer. It's probably the fuel, if you like, of a lot of what happens in our bodies. Water is the medium.
Right. Okay.
Water is what makes biological life possible because it's liquid crystalline, therefore it can hold memory, it can hold the information and help organize the light coming in and enable processes to unfold. And so it's a really different way of looking at biomechanics, if you like, how we function, how we move. And just understanding that biological water is not the same as regular water in a glass, which is in a liquid state. Biological water is actually a gel state. It's a fourth phase.
Yeah.
Again, here we get into terminology. So there's so many different ways of describing the water. It's interstitial water, it's easy water, it's structured water, it's liquid crystalline. It has layers of interaction that are largely quantum in nature, shared electrons, which enable it to organize itself. And so it's really a structure that allows coherence, allows information transfer, and myriad cellular reactions at near 100% efficiency, which is what makes it essential to life. And when we lose structured water, which we do usually as we age, we start to see disease coming in, and problems in our in our mitochondria, which are, water filled and use light to produce energy. So it's a fascinating subject. It's even involved in the heart. And we used to think the heart was purely a pump. We now know it's an electromagnetic integrating organ, but it allows information to pass around the body. It actually integrates the brain and not the other way around. It has the largest electromagnetic spectrum of any organ in the body. It has a field that sits up to 10 to 15 feet away. And water is involved in pulling the blood through the system. When you look at the electrodynamics of the heart, it's simply not powerful enough to push the blood through all the tiny capillaries that we have. And so it's actually the water that helps that process by drawing fluid through. So it's very, very interesting and so undiscovered until, as I say, in the last maybe 10 to 15 years.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly is fascinating and mind-blowing, really. As I said earlier, as a biochemistry student, I wasn't taught any of this, but as a nutritional therapist, I wasn't taught that light is a nutrient. And what you're saying, is so important, that we actually, our mitochondria in our cells use light to create energy in the body. Our energy doesn't just come from our food, it comes from light. I mean, that's a really amazing revelation in itself, isn't it?
Well, as I say, we used to think only plants did that, and then we ate the plants to harvest the energy. We're now finding that light photons are impacting the electron transport chain in our mitochondria.
Yes.
Allowing this electron transport and the movement of charges one way or another to sort of drive it. We had a very mechanical view. It was sort of forged in the Victorian age of machinery, you see, of one thing, gear turning into another gear turning and so on. And if you look in textbooks now and you look up the electron transport chain, you'll still see it as a machine that is largely chemical.
I don't think the textbooks have changed much.
I don't think they have. And yet the evidence is showing that these light photons are hugely important. And if we're deprived of light, which most of us are, because more and more we spend lives inside looking at blue screens, behind glass and concrete and brick, and we don't get daylight. Even when we go outside, we wear sunglasses or we wear contact lenses or whatever we're wearing actually filters light and stops light coming into the eyes. And so I always recommend to people, get light into your diet, particularly morning light. You don't have to stare into the sun if it's a bright day. Daylight is all you need, and it can be oblique. You just need to get the photons going into the system, and that not only regulates your biological clock, but it also creates this energetic input which helps everything work better in your cells. So
something you said earlier is it's not just light within the visible range, but outside of that's important as well, isn't it? And we're beginning to understand, because with this new understanding, it's got many implications, and it's helping us to realize that some of the ways we've been living, like you say, under fluorescent strip lighting, a lot of artificial light, spending more and more time in front of screens which give off the blue light. And blue light we need, but we also need red light, don't we? So I don't know if you want to just briefly say something about the different light frequencies and how
so the full spectrum of, say, let's take daylight. Daylight has a large amount of infrared at one end and ultraviolet at the other, and they're both biologically really needed.
Right.
But modern lighting has denuded both those aspects and created a very much narrower and more blue tinged, particularly with the modern LEDs and, as you say, fluorescence. The incandescent light bulb, interestingly, was developed by Max Planck to mimic the sun.
Right.
Electromagnetically.
Okay.
So old style light
Yes.
bulbs were actually much healthier for us than the modern
Yes.
ones. But having said that, you know, daylight is best because you get such a huge increase in the amount of light that reaches the body. It's something like 100 times on even on a dull day, being
Right.
outside compared to inside.
Yes.
But we've got these blue tinged sources of light now, which you can look at the spectrum. In fact, I'll be showing you that in the presentation, where the blue is enhanced and the red is completely denuded.
Right. Okay.
And we really need infrared, particularly because that's what our bodies use to kind of promote these processes. And so getting morning daylight is really, which is higher in infrared,
yes,
is really profound for our bodies. And so just light bathing is something that I'm teaching people to do now. And because I work a lot with people who are chronically ill and they don't go out, they don't see the sun.
yes.
That happened to me, you know, when I got ill, and you know, I was basically in bed most of the time. When I did get up, it was just to move around the house and do the essentials, but I didn't think of light as a nutrient. I was never taught that. It just didn't impinge, you know. So
we'll get into your story a little bit in a minute, if that's okay. But before we do that, let's go back to water, because you said some fascinating things there. And again, we're touching on things fairly briefly today, and you're going to talk more about these things in the live presentation in April. But water is a liquid crystal. Let's say a bit more about that. And water holds memory. And then let's also talk about that structured water a little bit more.
Yeah,
it's okay.
yeah. Obviously in my presentation I'll have some images which are easier to explain. But what do I mean by structured or liquid crystal? Well, if you think of a typical crystal, say quartz or diamond, they have regular layers of organized atoms. The atoms are in layers of organized arrangements. They're not random, in other words.
Okay.
And so biological water, structured water as it's also called, is organized in a similar way, but the bonds between them are slightly more flexible than quartz or crystal.
Yes.
That's what we mean by liquid crystalline. They have movement, but they are still ordered and structured.
Yeah.
And they're able to therefore conduct information along the structured layers, and each layer communicates with the other and is able to interact and shift. And so it's a very different understanding of water to the H2O molecule, which we all thought was just a little ball and stick with, you know, hydrogens and oxygens connected together and interacting. But now we see that they're actually tetrahedral in organization. So several molecules organized together in these tetrahedral groups in distinct layers. And I've forgotten what the other question was.
Well, that's just really great to have some understanding of what you mean by structured water. But there's also this idea that water holds memory.
Oh, yes, memory.
How does that relate to the structure? And
right. So when a molecule comes into contact with water, it has this resonance with the structure of water itself. And because water is so unique and has these extraordinary physical properties of being liquid at a temperature that no other molecule it actually has. It has several very important differences between other molecules very near it in the periodic table. So we understand that the conformation or resonance of any introduced molecule interacts with the water to create a sort of patterning, which even when you take the originating molecule away is still retained by these water molecules in conformation. And DNA is a good example. You know, there were several researchers who found that you can put DNA in water solution, take the DNA out, recreate the DNA from the information that is retained in the water. All right. The code itself is in the water conformation, not so much in the molecule.
Right.
And so that revolutionizes the idea of treatment. It might explain how homeopathy works.
Yeah.
It's a non-local entanglement is the is the quantum view. All right. So what we mean by non-local is it exists in all space and all time. It's an informational field which is instantaneously present everywhere. And the entanglement part is, once in connection, these well, it's primarily electrons that do this. The electrons of the water and the electrons of the introduced molecule are somehow conformationally or informationally changed, and affected by the environment as well, because the environment is also in resonance.
Including our emotions.
Including our emotions. So
I mean, the work
you said that. Yes.
Emoto and his work looking at using emotions to imprint on the water and give the water different properties.
Now, I was lucky enough to meet him before he died. I went to, for some reason, he came to do I think it was at the university when I was working there, he came to do a talk, and it was still regarded as really, as I say, pseudoscience. Nobody serious attended the lecture. It was only those of us who were with an open mind. And he was very elderly by then. But he showed us that when he froze the water into crystals, if the water had been subjected to feelings of love and friendship and joy, it formed the most beautiful crystals. But if you gave the water a feeling of fear or grief or hatred, it was disorganized, and the crystals didn't form very well, and they looked awful. The experiments at the time that he did were so out of the conventional loop that nobody took them seriously, and they just thought they were the ramblings of an old man. But it's been largely proven now over and over again by subsequent researchers that emotions affect the liquid crystalline structure of the water. Now, bearing in mind we're 70 to 80% water, what does that suggest that emotions might do to you? And I guess that's what ties in nicely with the work that I do. I work at the emotional healing level, trying to get people out of stuck emotions that maybe they inherited from childhood experiences that they had that they haven't really processed as over, and so they're stuck with this patterning.
I want to get into that in detail. Just before we do, the implications of all of this, as I said before, with the light and now the water, are so huge, aren't they? With my nutritional therapist hat on, I think about the food we eat and this tradition that's in many cultures of saying grace or blessing our food before we eat it. Basically, food is largely water. And so if we spend a few moments just sending gratitude and love for our food, then that's likely going to change the structure. And as you say, this will happen very fast. Change the structure of the water and therefore the food. And many people believe that that will change the structure in a positive way, meaning that it's actually more beneficial and more nutritious for us. I certainly believe that that's true. And now we have some explanations for how that could possibly happen.
So
yes,
can I interject?
Of course, yes.
So what's really interesting there is, you know, so many people would see a nutritional therapist and they get given a list of foods that they need to avoid and some that they need to enhance, and a list of supplements that they need to add in. And they might be coming at it from a lot of fear and a lot of angst. You know, I've got to get better and this is what's going to fix me. And they pay no attention whatsoever to how they eat. It's not about so much what you eat, although that's important, but how you eat. And this idea of infusing food with love and tenderness and care, and saying, actually, I love my body and therefore I take care of what I put into it. If you're in fear, that's the message you're imprinting. And I think that's why, and I don't want to be critical of any particular modality, because you you know, they're all useful. But for people who are in chronic states of disease, just throwing a lot of new substances at the body can be less helpful, because the body's still receiving the messages of threat which haven't been
Yeah.
overcome. And
Yes.
so I
Yeah.
think we have to look at loving ourselves first. That might sound a
Yes.
bit, you know, but
Yes.
really looking at the emotional connection we have with our food and with our lives, and with the meaning we're giving to what we're doing. You know, are we in good connection with ourselves, with others? Are we doing jobs that we love? Or are we just going through the motions? You know, all of this impacts us physically, you know, it really makes a big difference. So
Yeah, absolutely. And so our conversation is really moving into the emotional now, which is lovely. I'm wondering though, how did you get from working as a scientist like you were in a lab, I think?
mm,
Um, what was your journey moving from that? And like you said, very left brain approach to life. And then how did you move more into this interest in the quantum, and now your work as a therapist, particularly around emotional healing? How
mm.
did that journey happen for you? Because you mentioned also that you were unwell at a certain point.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that was the catalyst, really. I mean, I was
Right.
very embedded in the biomedical model. I
Mm.
worked as a researcher. I also worked in research administration for a number of years. But in my mid-30s, I fell quite ill
Mm.
with a mystery condition that we now tend to call chronic fatigue syndrome, or ME.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
but at the time that I fell ill, it was really misunderstood. It was called yuppie flu. It was considered something that only happened to people who were mentally unwell, that it was
Mm.
somehow all in the head and not real. And they were
Yes.
creating the symptoms to get attention. That was really the view then.
Mm. Yeah.
But I just started to lose energy. It was like someone had pulled the plug on me.
Mm.
And I struggled to get up in the morning to function. I was very anxious. I wasn't sleeping. It
Mm.
affected everything about me, really. And
Yeah.
I pushed on through, which everybody does.
Mm.
But you know, eventually I had to abandon the medical model, because everything I did to try and sort the problem with the help of my GP
Mm.
did nothing. It just made me worse. And
Mm.
I remember it was a crucial moment. I went to see an acupuncturist, which was so outside of my comfort zone.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, oh, this isn't going to work, but whatever. And was amazed to find within 3 days that something actually did happen, and I felt better.
Right. Yes.
So, and that kind of threw me, because I'd had years of very expensive education and thought I knew everything, as you do. And I'd never heard of energetic lines through the body. It all seemed
Mm-hmm.
very outlandish. But when I really compared the results in a week or two of that compared to the years I'd had it was a couple of years further on down the line.
Mm.
I was forced to realign, actually, and
Yes. Yeah.
I went to work in a different department where they were looking at alternative therapies, as they were
Ah,
called then,
right.
alternative
Yeah.
therapies. So they
Yeah.
investigated homeopathy and acupuncture, and from a scientific perspective. And I was like, oh, there is actually a really good research base. So that
Where
was
was
part of it. Mm.
Southampton?
Yeah, it was
Was
Southampton. Yeah,
yes,
I worked at
right.
Southampton University in their primary care uh, unit, but it was allied to the sort of alternative health
Mm.
part
Yes,
as
I knew
well.
they had a department that
Yeah,
were looking at that down there.
yeah, they
Yes.
did, and it was
Right.
very strong, and it had some really good research scientists in it who were very
Mm.
good at getting grants. So we
Yes.
were often quite successful.
Yes.
So there was that going on, and then
Mm-hmm.
I had sort of determined that I didn't want to be working in a regular sort of environment all my life. I had this interest in alternative health because it had largely got me well.
Yes. Yes.
I learned massage therapy, and I thought I would be a massage therapist. That was what I was
Mm-hmm.
aiming to do. And then somebody came to see me very early in my career. I was literally 6 months in, and something I did to her, I touched the back of her neck and her sacrum to ground her, which is what we were taught.
Yes.
And there was this intense reaction from this woman who leapt off the bed and spontaneously started to shake, and her nose started to bleed, and
Wow.
I'd never seen anything like it.
Mm,
I had no idea, and I had to find out. I had to find out what had
mm,
happened to her in that moment. And it
mm,
turned out it was a trauma reaction from a long buried, repressed memory. And
mm,
from that moment, I started to investigate the effects of trauma and the energetic nature of the human being. And
mm,
what I found completely blew my mind. And I was astonished to find that I knew none of this. And I had done
mm,
20 to 25 years, not only of study, but of working in the field. And I knew nothing. I
mm,
really was surprised. And the
mm,
more I learn now, as I work as a trauma therapist, as I've
mm,
kind of honed the understanding, I'm constantly amazed by the
mm,
reactions that I see with
mm.
clients. It's astonishing.
And what sort of techniques are you using, or what methods are you using to help people in your
Yeah.
work
Well,
as a trauma therapist?
yeah, I have gone much more for the somatic view. Okay, I guess because of my background with
Mm,
massage.
mm.
Um,
So just explain, what do you
yeah.
mean by that then?
Okay, so somatic, soma means the body.
Mm-hmm,
Um, so emotions are not just concepts in the brain, they're physiological.
mm-hmm.
They arise as complex energetic states, largely unconsciously in your back brain, and they communicate through the liquid crystalline matrix of the body,
Yes.
including the nerves, obviously the autonomic nervous system,
Mm-hmm,
to
mm-hmm,
create states of threat or safety throughout
mm-hmm,
the body.
mm.
And so, what I'm working with is anything that talks to that. And I
Okay.
have found that language and just talking about the problem bypasses the language that the body uses. And so it takes a long time.
Mm-hmm.
So people who've gone through talk therapy will often be in weekly sessions for years sometimes
Yes.
to
Yeah.
try and resolve their issues
Yeah.
and aren't getting very far,
Mm-hmm.
because when we're only using the 10% of our brain that really works cognitively, and the rest
Mm-hmm.
is all
Mm-hmm.
emotional and
Mm-hmm.
feeling sense. And so I use techniques that use touch largely.
Mm-hmm.
Tapping is one of the tools I use,
Okay. Yeah.
and sight, so EMDR, which is eye movement
Okay.
desensitization and reprocessing, uses eye movements, which is again
Yes.
sensory experience that talks to your back brain, that
Okay.
rejigs neurological impulses
Mm-hmm.
energetically from being stuck in a place of threat into a place of safety.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, and there's another self-touch, havening touch, which is
Mm-hmm.
another process that some people
Mm-hmm.
use that I teach to people as a self-soothing
Mm-hmm.
tool. Um, so anything that's sensory goes through the
Yes.
body up to
Yeah.
the brain. So it's bottom up, not top down.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so those tools for me work, but there are very many other tools that other people use: craniosacral work, chiropractic, um, uh, all sorts of energy healing methods
Mm-hmm.
that some
Mm-hmm.
people use.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that these are the tools I have
Yeah.
found helpful, and that I
Yeah.
use together
Yeah.
with a little bit of magic in the mix as well.
Yes.
Observation. It's not all about the tools, actually. It's about the
No, no, of
connection,
course.
obviously, the
It
heart
is.
connection with the
It
person
is.
you're working with.
And I was going to mention the heart there because
Mm.
from the way I look at things, emotions, they arise in the heart, and they very quickly, it's the brain that's processing those emotions.
Yeah.
And then we feel them all over our body.
Yes, we
So
do.
that all aspects are involved. So I wondered whether you bring heart into your work at all. I mean, obviously through the heart connection you've mentioned, but
Yeah, I mean, I it's implicit in what I do,
yes, right.
rather than me saying, right, we're going to shift your heart resonance
Mm,
here.
mm, mm.
I do use HRV, which is a very important heart rate variability
Okay.
tool, which
Yes,
allows you to create a more resonant field, which
yes,
entrains your brain.
yes,
But when I'm working, it's more establishing that mutual bond of belief about the
yeah,
person's ability to express their truth,
right.
the true self, as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to the adapted self, which they have been living for many years.
Yeah.
And that's why I got ill, actually. I was in an adapted state of trauma,
Yes.
where I was just constantly achieving as a means of self-worth, very productively, I have to say, but it wasn't good for my system, and eventually that's why I think my system broke down. And that's what I bring to the healing of other people, because I see they're in a similar place. They may have a different history, different traumas, different experiences, different emotional blockages, but when I'm sitting with someone, I'm immediately seeing and feeling their potential as a human being to self-heal.
Yes.
And so I think the heart connection, the heart space, this field of resonance, which you can perceive in a person,
yes,
when they make a change in that resonance, you can immediately see it in the face and the way they hold themselves. And sometimes you see it almost instantaneously shift, which is the quantum awareness.
Yes.
And my job really is to help assimilate that change, because although you can make the change instantaneously, for it to stick, you have to be in a state of open-hearted acceptance.
Yes.
And so you can't just tell a person, right, you're done, that's it. We need to keep practicing these states of loving, open, compassionate awareness until it becomes second nature and overwrites the old program of fear-based limitation, which is where most people are in their lives, honestly.
I mean, that is so much the power of working with a therapist, isn't it? When you find the right therapist who, like you say, is coming from a very open-hearted place and believes in the potential of that person, to have someone reflecting that back to you is so much of the power of the healing of those methods.
It's not what you throw at it. It's not the technique. It's that connection that matters.
Yes.
I'm sure you know that from the work you've done.
Yeah.
You know, when you're working with clients, you know when you have good connection, and when something
Absolutely.
magical happens.
It does. It's the alchemical, isn't it?
It is the alchemical, exactly, which is interesting. Why I chose that name for my business was because there's a
yes, I hadn't thought of that.
there's something above and beyond the physical that happens in those moments, which you know, I had it yesterday with somebody, and she says, what is it about you and me? And I said, I don't know, we just have this connection, and things happen between us that I can't predict. I can't say, oh yes, I expected that. You never know. You're right, it's alchemical. Yeah, very good.
And you know, this is where we get back into the quantum, isn't it? Because our consciousness, if we want to go into, you know, that large area, that's on a quantum level too. Is there something you can say about how we understand consciousness on a quantum level?
Yeah. So if everything is connected in an entangled field of information and energy, and we are interacting with that, how would consciousness exist just in this part of us?
Yes.
All right. How is that? And you'll still find there are you know, scientists trying to find what they call the physical correlate of consciousness. They're trying to find the group of neurons in the brain, or the resonant structures that somehow create it. I think much more, you know, accurately, consciousness exists in the structure of the universe, in the quantum oscillating units of which we are embedded and which we're interacting with all the time. And so consciousness is present everywhere. The brain is a sort of decoding organ that enables us to have this physical experience for a limited time in order to help the consciousness evolve. Consciousness is at the core of the universe. It's not as a result of matter, it's the other way around.
Absolutely.
So I think if we, and I'm not the only person, you know, by no means am I the only person who believes this now. You'll see a lot of theoretical physicists that consciousness is primary, matter
the ground of our being.
Yeah, exactly. And so that means that we are more powerful than we know. Because we're not only able to perceive, it's not only a download from consciousness, it's an upload too.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
what
Like
we
you
think
say,
and how we
helping
live.
consciousness evolve. Sorry.
Exactly. We're
Yeah,
helping it evolve. Yes. Sorry,
yes,
sorry to
yes.
interrupt you. Yeah, yeah.
No, yeah. Wow, that's amazing. And there's so many things that I'm going to link below this presentation, because for people who want to explore water in more depth, then I would recommend the work of Gerald Pollock. I'm sure
Yes.
you would too.
Yeah.
So we'll put lots of links, but I also want to mention your books. Now, this one, Life Illuminated, is the first one of yours I read, and that Life Illuminated, How Light and Energy Underlie Life. That's a fantastic one for giving an overview of some of these things you've been talking about on the quantum side in a lot more depth. And you do explain things so well, Patricia. So I really recommend, if people have been interested in the quantum, the light and the water, that book is brilliant. I don't have your books on trauma healing here, but tell us a bit about what you've written on that side of things.
The first book I ever wrote, and the one that really covers trauma, I do need to say, trauma is not just extraordinary, outlandish things that happen to people. It's
Right.
emotional wounding that's very
Yes.
common to many people.
Yes.
I wrote a book called The Scar That Won't Heal back in 2015, I think it was.
Right.
I've revised it since and brought
Yeah.
in new information, but that's the one that really talks about chronic illness and the
Okay.
relationship with stress, past stresses as well as current stresses, and how that
Okay.
impacts the body and how you can heal.
Right.
And then more recently, I wrote one called Mind Medicine.
Okay.
I wanted to call it Mind Magic, but
Right.
I had a lot of feedback that magic had this negative connotation for a lot of
Okay.
people. But
Yes.
it is about changing the nature of your physical experience through changing your awareness, through
Right.
changing the beliefs and resonances that you carry in
Yes.
your thoughts, you know,
Yes.
and emotions. So
Yes.
emotional healing is so key to a lot
Yes.
of this.
Yes.
But yeah, I've kind of been exploring this whole field myself, and every time I come across new information, I want to write a book
You want
about
to put
it.
it
So
down,
it's
the
just
book. Yeah. And like you say, this is relevant for everyone, isn't it? It's not, because when sometimes that word trauma, it does make people think of big traumas. But like you say, it can be something that on paper might look quite everyday, quite minor, but especially when these things occur in our very young years, we're hugely sensitive beings, and particularly as young children, and before we've got that, our logical mind is mature, we absorb some of these emotional upsets so deeply, and if we don't process them in some way or another, we carry them with us, don't we? And they can then manifest in various ways, like depression and mental health problems, but also physical illness. In my work, over many years working with people with cancer, so often I was working with nutrition a lot, but so often I felt that these people needed or it would be very beneficial for them to look more deeply. And, not just in cancer, but all conditions, it seems very often there are these traumas underlying. But even people who are struggling, with stress or just the challenges of an everyday life, these things can be impacting without us being aware, can't they? So it's relevant for everyone. Would
yeah,
you agree?
yeah. I don't think there's many people who get through a childhood without some traumatic experiences. The difference for some people is that they're more sensitive
Yes.
emotionally,
Yeah.
and so things affect them more.
Mm.
And I didn't realize how emotionally sensitive I am. I just assumed I was the way
Mm.
everyone else is, until I kind of grew up and realized not everybody takes things on the way I do.
Yes.
So trauma can be the absence of something needed, particularly for sensitive
Mm.
children. It's not just
Mm.
terrible things that happened. It might be
Yes.
things that needed to happen that didn't happen.
Right.
And I think there are all kinds of experiences. Your birth can be very traumatic. Your
Mm. Mm.
emotional connection with your parents, particularly mother, can be
Mm.
somehow misaligned or
Yeah.
misattuned. You know, that
Yeah.
heart
Yeah.
connection doesn't work well.
Mm-hmm.
And that certainly was the case for me, through no fault of mine or my mum's. It's just her pattern had been
Yes.
traumatized, and therefore
Yeah.
when she
Yeah.
came to mother me, she couldn't really emotionally connect with me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And these things are very important landscapers of our biosystem, you know, the
Yes.
biofields, what we
Yeah.
carry, the energetic field we carry around ourselves. And
Mm-hmm.
mine was wounded, it was
Yeah.
damaged.
Yes.
I say wounded, it's really important because wounds can heal.
Mm-hmm.
That we're not broken.
No.
We're
No.
simply carrying an imprint that no longer works for us. And that's what
Yes.
disease comes to tell us. It comes
Yes.
to stop us in order to reconfigure
Mm-hmm.
the energetic system. And yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it's
Mm-hmm.
not pleasant. Nobody wants to go through it, but it can be completely life-changing.
Yeah. And
And I'm
it was for
sure
you. Yeah.
mm,
It was for you, and you obviously have regained your health. Are you seeing, I'm sure you are, very positive changes in the people you work with, physically and emotionally?
mostly
Mm.
very powerful changes. And I'm going to be really honest here, because we see a
Yes.
lot of people interviewed who say, yes, yes, I see all these amazing transformations. And, you know,
Yeah.
people immediately want to sign up and
Yeah.
buy the course or book in.
Yes.
Um, it's a very, very instinctive process. So it's different for everyone.
Mm.
I do get amazing results. I'm not going to
Mm.
pretend I don't.
Mm.
Some people are so deeply in fear and
Mm.
so phobic of their responses that they
Mm-hmm.
really struggle initially.
Mm-hmm.
And we
Mm-hmm.
need lots of other supportive structures to help
Yes.
keep them on an
Yeah.
even keel while we go into the deeper areas of wounding.
Yeah.
So I can't say 100% success rate, because there are some people that just aren't ready, or they just don't have the support that they need to go through it. But for people who do, it's completely, utterly life enhancing.
Yes.
It's not
Yes.
just about fixing that problem, like you were saying with cancer
Mm.
patients. You know,
Mm.
a lot of people, when they get to having a cancer diagnosis, and I've had a skin cancer myself, it's
Mm.
so shocking. You go so deeply
Yes.
into fear,
Mm. Mm.
and the whole biomedical model then kicks in and gives you more.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
you've got to have this and then that treatment and so on.
Yeah. Yeah.
Getting at least into a place of contemplation, of awareness, of open-hearted understanding that this is your body expressing its
Mm.
discomfort, its dysregulation
Mm.
with something in your life. It's not,
Mm.
you're not to blame for your cancer,
Mm.
but there are things going on at a fundamental level that you've never looked at.
Mm.
And again, this is completely dismissed
Yes. Yeah.
biomedically. We
Yeah.
simply treat it as a physical disease
Yes.
in the area it shows up.
Mm. Mm.
And so we say there are hundreds of different cancers.
Yeah.
You'll hear people say that, and
Yeah.
it's like, well, no, there's one mitochondrial dysfunction creating
Yeah.
that, but it's
Yeah.
just showing up in hundreds of different areas.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that could be due to mitochondrial weakness in certain parts of your body, which is heritable through epigenetic changes that you may have got from your mother.
Yes. Yes.
That's another complete area that I
Yeah.
possibly won't have time to go into, but
Yes.
where it shows up is just the weak spot.
Absolutely. Yes.
It's
Yeah.
not that that is the dysfunction, and therefore if you cut that piece out,
Mm.
you'll be fine. Well, you
Mm.
will, hopefully, if
Mm.
you look at what's driving
Yes.
the
Yeah.
mitochondrial dysfunction in the first place. So
Yeah.
I think we have to look at disease and health in a completely new way, and that's really what I have totally shifted my worldview
Yes.
from this reductionist view into this energetic understanding. And
Mm.
but I can talk both languages. And
Mm.
that's what I love. I love this science spiritual
Yeah,
dialogue
and
that
that's
we're
what's
having.
so wonderful for us to listen to. But I totally agree with you. I think that we do need to look at disease in a completely different way. And I really appreciate you being honest, because I know as a therapist myself, not everyone is ready to delve deep and to come face to face with some of those difficulties they've faced. it can be challenging, you know, and not everyone's ready to do that. But like you're saying, those people that I've worked with who really are ready to embrace whatever is showing up for them and to go deep into what could be underlying those things can have such amazing transformations, and not just in their physical health, but their whole life. You know, the things they are doing for work, or how they spend their time can shift, and all sorts of things. And so it can be incredibly powerful when someone's really ready to embrace all of that.
Yeah,
Um,
it's transformational,
yeah,
and it's not just in
transformation.
the area of whatever
Yeah,
disease or condition they have, it's in the area of their relationship to their life.
exactly. Their relationship to life. You're absolutely spot on. So your business, we mentioned before, is called Alchemy Therapist. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah,
Yes.
alchemytherapist.co.uk. Yep.
Brilliant. So we'll put the link for that below this interview, and you've got another website that details your books. We'll put that there too.
Yeah, brilliant.
Um,
Thank you.
is there anything else you wanted to finish with, Patricia? I know we're going to get another chance to speak to you soon, but is there anything else for today that you wanted to finish with?
Well, I think really the importance of embracing this quantum view, which gives people hope, and it empowers people to heal themselves with help. That's not to say everyone can do it alone, and I don't think you should.
Yes.
I think we need to reach out and gain this support from people who've trod the path before us.
Yeah.
But the idea that everything is possible, that disease is only a maladaption. It's a glitch in the matrix.
Yes.
And we need to restore the full informational imprint. And that's what I do, I think. I'm becoming more and more aware, I'm sure you are as you work with people, that our purpose here isn't to fix and send people on their way exactly as they were before they got ill.
Yes.
It's to realign them with the truth. And therefore, for me, this is an entirely inspiring and hopeful and life-affirming process that, as I said before, not only enhances the individual, but the collective.
Yes.
Because
Yes.
the more people that learn how to heal, the more healed our world gets.
Yes.
And so
Absolutely.
what we're seeing at the moment in the world is entirely dysfunctional, traumatized. You know, that's why we're seeing who we're seeing in power.
Yeah.
And, you
Yeah.
know, the rest of us are having to sort of just go with it. But we have more power than we know. And I think just getting healed yourself is the first step towards really inhabiting your true potential.
Yes, absolutely. And that comes back to the quantum again, doesn't it? Because when we heal ourselves, we send out a different energy,
Totally.
and that energy spreads as far as we can imagine on a quantum level and impacts everything in our environment, and beyond. And so, yeah, you're right. If we can heal ourselves, we can heal the world.
Yeah, we really can. And it doesn't take all of us. I mean, it
No,
doesn't take 100% of the people to be healed. It's actually statistically shown that only 10% of people need to make the shift in order to totally
right,
change. And there is
right.
a theory, not getting into this right at the end, but there is a
Yes,
theory that we are on the cusp of a major kind of upgrade of our DNA, of our biological
yes,
system.
yes. Of our
Several
consciousness.
Our consciousness is
Yes.
ready to make the next leap into a higher state where we become loving, self-aware, cooperative, rather than these destructive, competitive beings that we have been for the last several thousands of years,
Yes,
and
yes,
get into a state of harmony with the universe, which is trying to interact with us. So,
yes,
can we do that? I think we can. I do.
yes,
But sometimes we have
yes,
to fall before we rise, and I guess
yes,
that's what's happening at the moment. But here we are, two voices amongst many, giving this message of hope to the world and saying, come and join the revolution, as it were, which is happening
yes,
right now. We're very
yes,
privileged to be here at this point in our evolution, because I think we're on the
yes,
cusp of something major, and I hope I live long enough to see it.
yes. I think you will, Patricia. I
Well,
do.
who
And I
knows?
think that couldn't be a more hopeful, life affirming end to this interview. So thank you
Well,
so
thank
much.
you.
That's
Thank you
been
very
wonderful.
much for inviting me.
So many topics covered there. And as I say, I'll put lots of links below so that people can explore in more detail.
Well,
And
thank
if
you.
you'd like to hear more from Patricia, then please consider joining us if you watch this in time for the live event, which is happening on the 10th of April. And we look forward to seeing you then, Patricia. Thank you
Yep,
again for
we will.
joining us. And thank you everyone for watching, and look forward to connecting soon. Take care.